A clash of styles to kick off the prelims. Coming up this weekend, we have Mongolia's Storm. Danaa Bakari is going to be taking on Bam Bam Brady Hiestand. And when you look at the overall career arc of both of these guys, put yourself in their shoes 2 fights ago. For Brady Hiestand, he's going into the finale of The Ultimate Fighter against Ricky Tercios. He has a blood and guts type of fight of the night where he loses to split decision. Listen, some of those rounds were really chintzy. He got dropped at one point in the 3rd round. But for Hiestand, that kind of is where it stands. For Batgerel Danaa, he was on a 3-fight knockout streak in the UFC after he lost Alatang Lee to make his debut. He's taking on Chris Gutierrez. He's the favorite against Chris Gutierrez. And then he gets finished in that fight. And then a couple of months afterwards, he replaces Simon Oliveira on short notice after switching up his training camp to Tiger Muay Thai. And then he ends up losing a kind of a close decision to Kyung Ho Gong. So for both of these guys, it is kind of a get-right fight. And I know for Hiestand, that might sound a little odd, but his last time out, he did get wobbled by the first punch that Fernie Garcia threw in that one. He went out there with his wrestling shoes. He ended up going out there, getting a great decision win. And for Hiestand, that's kind of what he's known for. I know, coming into The Ultimate Fighter, people looked at Hiestand and they considered it okay. He's got some wins on the regional scene, tidy little amateur record, but as a pro, he had one loss to Chad Anheliger, who was 9-5 at the time. And Chad, turns out, pretty good fighter. He's in the UFC in his own right, but for Hiestand, out of all of the wins before he came into the UFC, 0-24 combined opponent record. So great. Then he goes out there, he beats Josh Reddinghouse, and that's a really recognizable name over with M1 Global. He beats Vince Murdoch, finishes him in that one. Then he gets into the finale against Tercio. So a lot of those question marks around the record, they kind of get thrown out the door a little bit. And what do we know about Hiestand? Well, as I said, trains at Sick Jitsu in the Pacific Northwest, and you'll see those influences in training, and I'll throw some pictures up there for Hiestand. Training for this camp out of Sick Jitsu, cross-training over at Syndicate with Michael Chiesa, with Vince Morales, who we're going to talk about later on in this card, because a little bit of give and take there with a guy like Ricky Simone, who trains out of ATT Portland. But for Hiestand, a lot of wrestlers, a lot of noted fighters in those corners. And when you look at a guy like Hiestand at only 23, he continues to kind of evolve his game and mix his martial arts when he fights.
He definitely does, but that's something that kind of worries me in this fight. I like the fact that he is so well-rounded, and the fact that he is starting to mix in his boxing with his wrestling a lot more effectively. But on the other hand, Danaa does throw a high variety of strikes, and although he might not be the highest level of striker, he's unorthodox with the way that he can throw hooks. He is a very long-range striker with the way that he can use his boxing, and I do think that there's a world, I told you this before we started filming, I think there is a world where Danaa could go in there and get a knockout in the first round and look really impressive, because he does move his feet very well for being a primary striker. And what's something we always say on this channel? It's not just a thing to have great takedown defense and dig underhooks, but if you have great footwork, that does help you evade some of the initial takedown attempts of your opponent, and I do think Danaa has the type of footwork that can help him avoid some of the initial takedowns of Brady Hiestand. But it will be interesting to see how Hiestand tries to close the distance, because if he does go in there using his boxing combinations like we have seen in the past, I don't know if he has the durability to stand up to the combinations of a guy like Danaa, because Bakari might be able to get hit on the chin, you can wobble him. If you're a really high level striker, you'll be able to give him issues because you might be able to out technique him, but I don't think Hiestand's going to be able to stand in this fight a lot. I'm sure he's going to use his boxing to try to open up his wrestling at a certain point, but I really do think that wrestling is the thing that's going to give him the majority of his success in the matchup, because I think he's going to struggle on the feet. Like you've said, even in fights that he's won, he has had a susceptibility to getting tagged on the feet, and against a guy like Bakari, he has that real kind of power where if he hurts you, he's not just going to let you get off the leash after that. He's going to pursue you and try to finish you afterwards.
Bakari, out of his takedown defense numbers, I mean, he's 3-3 in the UFC, so it's a decent level sample size, but he defended 4 of 7 total takedown attempts from Alatang Lee in that one. That was actually a fight of the night in his debut. He defended, he went 0 of 2 against Kyung Ho Gong. So I guess Gong went 0 of 2, sort of that 66% takedown defense for Batgerel Danaa. But you look at those knockout wins, and he won 3 fights in a row. He looked amazing in them. He goes out there and he beats Guido Canetti. It was a lead left hook knockout, and he floored him. Canetti was on Beach Street, as we now say. So in that one, a great win. Guido Canetti recently retired. He beats Kevin Natividad, lands a good right hand. The left hook is what stops him, and then there's about 5 unanswered shots after that one. Kevin Natividad out of the UFC. And then he takes on Brandon Davis. Performance bonus, Brandon Davis no longer in the UFC. So anybody that Batgerel Danaa has beaten is out of the UFC, and anybody that he's lost to is still in the UFC. So it's a little bit of a seesaw there with the record of a guy like Batgerel Danaa. We know how good the striking is. We know how good that lead left hook knockout can be when he's fighting from the orthodox stance. He will switch his stance a little bit, but I talk about the training camps out of both of these guys, and for Batgerel Danaa, that's where it really gets interesting, because as I said, for that Kyung Ho Gong fight, it was right after getting knocked out by Gutierrez. He switched it up to Tiger Muay Thai out of Thailand. For this one, Fight Ready MMA training with old foe, Alatang Hae Lee.
You love that.
But out of it, Alatang Hae Lee, Shimon Moraes, Julia Budd, Lance Gibson, they both lost recently. But when you do look at it...
Not in their primes, I think that's fair to say.
Lance Gibson is.
I guess Lance Gibson is. Sorry, Julia Budd, though.
Senior, no, but Gibson, yes. But when you look at it, too, for Batgerel Danaa, he is a part of the Brazilian contingent there with Eric Albarracin, Henry Cejudo, Costa, Patricky Pitbull. So you do like to see those guys and those looks. And I assume there's probably a lot of wrestling going on in that room. And I would think a perfect guy to emulate the style of a guy like Brady Hiestand, who was supposed to be on the next pay-per-view, but it was just announced that he fell out, is a guy like JSP, Jonathan Pierce, a long-rangey boxer who mixes in those long-rangey takedown attempts. So I really like this fight. The story of it for me is, of course, the wrestling of a guy like Hiestand and the power striking of a guy like Batgerel Danaa. Batgerel is favored in the matchup, Matt. I'll give you the point after we have a look at the Topology votes. Surprise to us, they are to you. I'm going to say over-under. I think it's going to be close. I'm going to say over-under 62.5% for Batgerel in this.
I think they'll be over, but just slightly.
Just slightly. 71% going with Batgerel Danaa. 79% by knockout. For the 29% that have Hiestand, 74% by decision.
So the only point I wanted to make was, I think we both agree, Hiestand has all the skills to win this by decision. I really do think he does. I think he can mix up his boxing in with his wrestling and go out there and just put a pace on Danaa that maybe he can't keep up with, to where he can effectively strike Hiestand to kind of make up for the difference that the control of his wrestling would make. But I still think the variety of strikes that Danaa can throw on the outside is going to be a little bit too much for Hiestand. If Brady goes out there and wins the decision, I will be more than happy to eat my words, because it will be nice to see a prospect who is only 23, who, like you said, seems to make those improvements, go out there and get a real meaningful win. But I do think Danaa, goodness, I've struggled with that, does just have the slight edge in striking. I do think that'll get it done for him.
I mean, for Hiestand, he started to kind of incorporate a little bit of a dominant cruise to his style, where he'll figure eight on the outside to try and land some of those single shots. He switches stances quite a bit in his own right, or at least he has as he's come along. And what we saw out of him in his last fight, again, some single shots, the reset, and then he gets out of space, throws the double leg out there, and if he's able to get it, he has some really good top pressure in these fights. And Fernie Garcia is no slouch. That's a really good win that Hiestand was able to get his last time out there. Odds were pretty close in the fight. I'll go with Batgerel Danaa because I do like the power in his fights, and I like the fact that even at 33, he's not necessarily shop worn, and he tends to have good output as his fights go on. So both of us going with Mongolia's Storm Batgerel Danaa to get the win in the matchup. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have will be the Ultimate Fighter runner-up, Bam Bam Hiestand, or will it be Storm Batgerel? Some big-time fights left on this card. Matt, co-main event, 135. Song Yadong taking on one tricky fighter from the Pacific Northwest in Ricky Simone. Main event, Pavlovich versus Blaydes. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.